was the Speaker of the House. And the Republicans took a beating. So you would think that they would say, okay, we tried this play. They're looking at their, their book of plays. And they would say, oh, we tried this play and it backfired on us terribly. You would think that they would tear it out of the playbook and tear that up and never go there again. That's what sane people would do.
Well, talking about sanity, let's segue into the fact that you recently just came back from Syria. We discussed Syria on this show, Roseanne Live, with Rania Masri and Grant Smith. So give listeners an idea what you learned from your visit to Syria.
Well, first of all, I have to say that it was my first time ever visiting Syria. And, of course, I was sorry to have to visit it under those circumstances, but, I had gleaned just a little bit about Syria many years ago when I was working on one of my, multiple, dissertations. The first dissertation that I was doing, I was looking at smaller countries, what happens to smaller countries, what are their options when their patron state implodes? And of course, the imploding patron state was the Soviet Union that ceased to exist and became, Russia. And so all of these other states, these smaller states that had clung to or aligned themselves with the Soviet Union were just sort of left out there. Cuba had to go through the special period, and I went and I visited Cuba. And my professor told me, well, you need to add more countries. I was looking at Cuba, Angola, and Mozambique. And he said, no, you got to add more countries. And one of the countries that he added two countries. One was Syria, the other one was Vietnam. So I had to do some preliminary background to familiarize myself with what was going on in Syria. That was really all that I knew, and that was such a long time ago. So when I went there, I had that in the back of my mind, but what I was able to see was a pluralistic society comprised of various strains of Christianity and various strains of Islam, Judaism, and of course people who don't believe. So you have all of this in Syria, and they've all figured out a way to live and be tolerant of each other's religious views. Now, of course, with my background, the first question I'm going to ask someone is not going to be, what's your religion? And well, from what I was told, it was not so much so that back in the good olden days of Syria, but now, of course, with this heightened awareness of Sufism and Alawites and Shiism and all of the different isms, that this has become a very prominent feature. The only thing that I could see when I was there was in my mind memories of what I experienced in Libya. Because I know that the objective is the complete disruption of the state of Syria, the inability of the Syrian people to form any government that would be able to have the institutions that would serve their needs primarily, and their rights, primarily that of self-determination. So knowing that going in, it was very difficult for me to hear the shelling because I was only in Damascus City proper. But you could hear the shelling on an ongoing basis. And so you know that's a country that is at war. It is not at war with itself. This is not a civil war. This is a war that has been imposed on the people of Syria by outsiders. And the role that the United States is playing in the decimation of the Syrian country, which ultimately the goal is to divide Syria into as many as 3, 4, or 5 different countries. That is the ultimate goal, and U.S. tax dollars should have no part of it.
That will be a lot more weapons that they can sell then, because that seems to be what's behind all of our foreign and domestic policy too. Sometimes I think that. But Cynthia, what can the United States do about its own problems right now? The fact that, it's basically austerity, so pretty soon if it keeps going, we won't be able to pay the police or the fire department. Won't we I'm afraid we're going to end up like Syria, because they're trying to keep the Americans from forming a democratic government that will represent them as well.
You're absolutely right. And if we took a critical eye and stepped back and looked at what's happening in the United States from a strategic kind of viewpoint, one of the authors that I read in my PhD program is Ron Heifetz, who writes a lot on leadership. And he says, go up into the balcony and then take a look at the experience on the ground, because when you're there on the ground, there's a lot that you miss. You can see the detail, but you can't see the bigger picture. So step up and go into the balcony. And if we go into the balcony and we look at what the United States has become since September 11th, but even prior to that, with the passage of the Secret Evidence Act, there were pieces of legislation that were passed that were precursors to the Patriot Act. And we can see, I can see at least, that the United States is entering what one professor, Patrick Ryan in Florida, calls the post-constitutional era.
Right.
And that's because our U.S. Constitution doesn't mean very much anymore.
What can we do about that, Cynthia?
Well, one of the things that we have to do is we have to care. Because, if we care, Roseanne, then we'll make it our business to learn as much as we can about that which we care about. And after we learn, then we are compelled to act. And we will be compelled to act. Does that mean voting for in the same way that you vote before? No, you have to behave differently. Does that mean waking up and even acting the same as you did before? You have this awakening? No, our personal behavior has to change. Everything about us has to change. And when we change, then we change the people around us as well. And we can set a goal to change our country. And that goal, I believe, still is an achievable goal.
Well, when you talk about,
we can get our constitution back in place so that we're not, I don't know what we are, a satellite state of royalty or something. I guess we're a satellite state of royalty, because all it seems to me is, power is, trying to pull all of its power together. It's like circling the wagons. And, sometimes I think, are Republicans trying to set off a civil war?
Well, what we have are people who have been elected. I think, by and large, there are large segments of the U.S. electorate that don't vote based on policy outcomes that they would like to see. I have said this too many times, politics is not a beauty contest. It's not a popularity contest. It's about power. And so it's beyond voting because you like the way a person looks, or you like the way a person dresses, or you like the way a person, you like their family portrait. That's not the basis on which we vote. And until we become more serious about our politics and our role in in this political system, the United States, believe me, I've been to a lot of different countries. I've seen a lot. The United States political system leaves a lot to be desired, but still, it's still possible for people who think like us to get elected, but they have to choose to run. So we need,
That's right.
we need candidates. And then when we get those candidates, they need to be supported. Now there's a time.
Oh boy, well that'll be hard. That will be kind of hard.
That's right. However, we do have some abilities that we didn't have even 10 years ago. And for example, there wasn't very much of an alternative media 10 years ago.
True.
But now you really don't have to rely on CBS, CNN, Fox, NBC, ABC, all of that conglomeration. You don't have to rely on them in order to get your news or to understand how a candidate is going to represent you. And in fact, if a candidate receives a lot of attention from those outlets, then that's a clue that we need to stay as far away from that candidate as possible.
Well, Cynthia, talking about alternative media, I know that you wrote a piece for the Black Agenda Report, and in that piece you specifically talked about what our next guest, Leonard Rowe, is talking about. You talked about the racism that exists in Hollywood. And so I want to bring Leonard Rowe on because I would like, he's been on before in June of last year speaking with Roseanne Barr about the racism in Hollywood. I know, and you brought to my attention that issue in that piece that you wrote for the Black Agenda Report. So do you want to comment on that piece, and while I pull up Leonard Rowe's bio, and you can just talk to us about that piece?
Let me say one thing, too. Let me say one thing first. I want to continue, because we didn't even get to a very important subject here, and Cynthia, maybe you can help us get the right people to speak about this further, but the intentional disenfranchisement of black farmers. You know, they get, you know, they made that happen, and now, as they do any policy they come up with, they don't just stop with black farmers. Now, you know, they're going to go all the way with till they get all farmers.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Well, I mean, I don't know if they're going to get all farmers because, you know, that's sort of like saying racism doesn't exist in a, you know, like they're racist against everyone. They're against everyone.
No, it's like this, Kathleen. Wherever there's money, they're going there. You know, they will suck the money out of
they? Who's they? Who is they? Who is they?
You know, well, the system.
No, but that's why we have to be specific. We
Right,
have to
you're
talk.
right.
We have to talk about
This system of capitalism will go anywhere where there are farmers and suck all the money away from them and give it into private pockets like Monsanto and stuff. That is the goal. And every racist program that they come up with and get away with, you know, that's just more fodder for them to use everywhere.
Okay, well, let's bring Leonard on because we can talk about because.
But let's do more on farmers.
Yeah, we'll do something
and
specifically.
The disenfranchisement of black farmers, the black vote, everything.
Okay, so Cynthia, we'll ask you to come back on to talk specifically about the issue regarding farmers.
Absolutely.
But